Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kegel Show. My name is Don Agent, and I'll be your host for today's episode, which we are actually doing a little spin-off. We're going to title this Back in the Day. And to my immediate left is one of my best friends, Steve Cross, who has been working at Kegel for over 20 years. And I thank you for making a debut appearance.
Well, thank you for having me, Don.
On the show. Steve, you and I have been friends for a couple of decades here.
Yeah.
We've lived together, we've traveled the world together, we've worked together. So we've got a lot of history, just you and I. But what I really want to talk about was you've got some pretty incredible history in your years of being involved not only in bowling, but in the bowling industry. So I'd kind of like to start out to let the audience know you've been an asset to tech support for literally 2 decades. You've done tournaments for us on a global scale.
That's correct.
You've represented us in collegiate levels and even back in the time when we were actually doing the PBA tour events. So I'd kind of like to start out with, how many years have you actually been working in the bowling industry?
Well, oddly enough, you mentioning that question, I've got actually an anniversary coming up here. I first started actually getting paid to be in the industry, or was hired, February 8th of it's 50 years actually. 1968, I was hired by Robin Hood Lanes in Seattle, Washington.
Wow.
To actually be a pin chaser. I was still in high school, so I was limited in time. So I started pin chasing, coming at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and work for 2 shifts a league and go home and then go to school the next day.
I didn't even know that. So you're hitting 50 years this year.
Yes, I am.
Fantastic, man. Congratulations, brother. What about bowling, though? You were bowling before that.
Yeah, I was actually. My folks and my grandfather on my mom's side were bowlers back in a town called Havre, Montana. They bowl once a week, and then as my dad advanced in his job with the Great Northern Railroad, we moved out to Butte, Montana, and my father wanted to go bowling one afternoon, and I was available, and me and him went down to the local 12-lane bowling center, and at that center, they still had pin boys.
I remember you telling me that story.
Pin boys. They had above-ground ball returns, rubber bowling balls, wood lanes, and at 10 cents a game, and no cost for the shoes at that time that was 1957. Wow. It was quite an enjoyable time, and the first time I got introduced to the bowling game.
What an experience.
Oh, yes.
That's awesome. You also, I mentioned you were doing lanes, in representation for Kegel on the PBA, but you were out on the PBA way earlier than that. And I mean, to give the audience a little bit of history, the PBA lane maintenance program was actually started in the 1971?
Spring of 71.
Spring of 1971 by Sam Baca and Lenny Nicholson.
That is correct.
And that expanded over the years, obviously, as tour grew, because we ended up, you had regionals and
the regional program was starting to flourish.
And that was pretty big, we know, in the South for sure. But you came on a little bit later in the 80s when the staff had expanded a little bit. Now they had Kerry Mogard in there.
Correct.
Lon Marshall was still...
He was the gentleman that hired me.
And he was actually the person that interviewed and hired you then.
Yes, I was given an opportunity in Seattle. I was working at a 50-lane center in Kenmore, Washington, and a good friend of mine that was on tour at that time, Hugh Miller, came in and said, Steve, Lon Marshall is interested in interviewing you for a job out there. You know, he was interested. Well, the next day I drove down to Skyway Park Bowl in Renton, and believe it or not, 5 minutes later I was hired. And the odd thing about it back then is he handed me a plane ticket with his name on it. Now, you can't do that
Couldn't
these
get away
days.
with that today.
But he handed me a ticket that had Lonnie Marshall on it, and it was a ticket from Seattle, Washington to Riverside, California, which was my first stop of many on the tour.
So you're off and running immediately.
The next week, because from Seattle, they were going to Tucson. I couldn't go there. And the next stop was at Riverside, and I met Kerry Mogard and Lon Marshall, who hired me. That's my maiden voyage right there.
All right, now I know how many tournaments you've done, but I'd like you to kind of give the audience an idea on how big that number. How many tournaments totally, we'll go worldwide, have you done?
Plus or minus 600.
Plus or minus 600.
Yeah,
So
right around
600 plus or minus a
Yes,
few.
that's
Gotcha.
correct. More plus than minus, probably.
600 is a lot of events.
Yes.
I mean, safe to say you've pretty much done one in every state, a lot of different continents.
The only state I haven't been in, oddly enough, being from Seattle, Washington, is Alaska.
That was the only one we
That's the only state I have not been in.
Incredible, incredible. You know, tournaments back then, obviously, I mean, formats were a lot different. But today, you know, we kind of really want to talk about some of the differences on a lane maintenance standpoint.
Right.
You know, we've got a couple of items here that we're going to go on to in a little bit that are sitting on the front of the table. You know, we used to have pre-inspection for these events before an event went into a house at a PBA level. What did those pre-inspections entail? Because back then we had a lot of wood centers.
Oh, yeah, they were majority wood, very little synthetics, but they were growing. Give you, for instance, with when Lenny was with us, he would do all the pre-tournaments. His day was like Thursday to Thursday, and he would leave Friday to go to the next tournament and set up for us and set up a pre-tournament. He'd bring bowlers in locally and put out different conditions and watch ball reaction, which we were absolutely the only way that we could really get to the point of fair conditions. That was our job, equity left to right and right to left. And we started out with that. Back those days, we also had a little pre-tournament called Rabbit Squads, which for those that are rabbits out there and listening to me, we didn't use you guinea pigs. We were truly trying to get a condition set for the tournament that started on Wednesday through Saturday.
Yeah, because the rabbit squads existed to kind of inform the audience, because the tournaments were full. You had massive amounts of people trying to bowl tournaments, so they only had so many spots. So the rabbit was another way to kind of qualify.
Yeah, there was the tournament was maxed out at 160. Then you had your touring ones and touring twos, which got the first bid. And if they didn't, then we filled up the tournament with the top rabbits in the tournament, and they bowled 2 5-game blocks on Monday.
You know, and that's going to kind of bring us into some of the lane maintenance stuff. You know, there were totally different lane maintenance procedures.
Oh, absolutely.
They were not automated, obviously, back in that time. And that's kind of, you brought us one of your signature tools that you use. Can you explain to the audience a little bit about what that is and why that specific one was the tool of the trade?
Well, back in there, and both me and Lenny have the same philosophy. Back then there was a lot of wicking machines, and wicking machines, they're inconsistent. The fact is you didn't know how much you got out of those wicks.
Temperature affected it, viscosity, all those things.
Yeah, the colder it got, the more restricted a flow through it, and vice versa with the heat. It was a little bit more oil, but with a spray gun, you could see it. You could see it. You could put it where you wanted it, and you saw it down there, and you knew you had oil on the lane. And by measuring oil, which we did, and we used cylinders like that just to see how much we had, which is, back then, it was 5 to 7 mils of oil per lane.
Now, 5 to 7 mils for the audience. This is a 25 milliliter graduated cylinder. This bottom black line is what they were utilizing in a PBA event back in the 80s.
Yeah, 80s through this past 92s, when our game totally changed with reactive resin.
And currently now, this black line up top here, which actually, well, not in the cylinder, because we're about 33 mils
actually,
now.
Don, you'd be overflowing that.
Yeah, I tried to get as close as I could. We'd actually have a bigger cylinder for that. So that tells you how much volumetrically it changed a ton. But, you know, this is a bug sprayer, correct? Is
exactly.
This for pesticide, essentially?
Yeah, actually, in this, you would pump it up with this handle here, and there was a amount of pumps and how you stroked it. Up here, this is how you could fan it by moving this back and forth, and this would give you your spray wider or narrower based on application through here.
And you and Lenny actually taught me how to spray a little bit in the beginning, and you actually had some hand
it
you
was
guys
hand motions, grips, and everything, because you know, you want, and that's where Christmas tree patterns come from. It's from this guy right here, because that's exactly how we tried to form the pattern on the lane. We're actually painting the pattern on the lane and then buffing it out with a Turkish towel and a T-bar.
Yeah, because you had the secondary process. You
Right,
guys
I mean,
cross-wiped and did some different things.
Yeah,
back then.
cross-white canes with a little bit tougher tournaments. We wanted to blend the oil out more on the gutter, and these were more for our high tournaments like your U.S. Opens, and
Firestone, maybe,
Firestone,
back then.
where there was set to be more of a premium on shot making.
That's wonderful. Now, can you even buy these anymore?
I think you can. I don't know if Hudson makes them anymore, but this is the big guy right here. They had a patent on this, and we tried to get that years ago, and they wouldn't sell it.
Just the tip.
Just
I
the tip.
remember
This,
John and
this
you
whole
looking
section
for
was a patented product by Hudson,
Yep.
and
So-
these things went for $56 a shot right there.
Flash forward to $40,000 lane machine.
Correct.
Which
This
is what's
$56 plus tax.
That's going to take us into that question here in a second. But to top off, there's always been rumors, and I've heard it from both you and Lenny and Carrie as well. What was the truth behind live oil, which was terminology that you guys introduced me to 20 years ago? I'd like you to kind of explain to the audience what that meant.
Well, live oil means you're getting direct injection of the oil out of the jug from the producer of the oil. When you run it through a lane machine, you're running through a transfer system which breaks it down, and then to a brush which breaks it down more. There's no breakdown with this. In fact, it's been proven to us and everybody this procedure would last longer.
Longevity. Lenny used
Longevity.
to say that because of it was how it atomized when it came out and how it contacted to the lane, it was still an incredible system to do. But it was a skill. Not everybody could go out and duplicate that
Right.
pattern.
And a lot of people honestly didn't know that once we came in and did the lanes early in the morning and we're done at 8 o'clock and they bolt at 9, well, there was no re-oils.
That's correct.
What you see is what you got from 9 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, 4 squads, 48 lines per alley bed. No way you could get through it these days. With
You
these
played
bolts.
where you played, and it was what it was.
That's correct.
You know, and then we used some wick machines, and then sanctioned technology, and when we were doing the lane conditions, obviously, did the tour, in your opinion, do you think they embraced the machinery more so as the years went on than they did this?
Yeah, they're a little skeptical when John came out with us in around '91. I met him in Florida. We did a tournament over on the Space Coast with the what we call the SM1 or the Sanction 1 with the 4 pumpers, and we had some good tournaments. And slowly but surely, in '91 we got the first lane walkers, the LCM and the Oiler. And we had that for a good year and a half. I was in contact with John. It's almost like I worked for Kegel starting in '91.
Right.
Because John was always helping us out and always calling in and seeing how things are going. If anything he could do, he'd fly out. And after about a year and a half, we took the walkers and replaced them with Phoenix pad machines. 2 of those, mainly because the walkers were good, but they were too slow.
Correct.
So we had no problem slinging them across the lane, so we got 2 of those, and we continued with the pad machines, throwing in the spray gun as variety. And a lot of people know when the arena settings came out, which was a great venue for bowling on ABC Sports, all arenas were done with this guy.
Yep.
It's more economical than to haul a lane machine all the way into an arena when we knew what we're doing with this. And that was our tool for those particular venues.
It's unfortunate that it's kind of becoming somewhat of a lost art. You know, you also traveled for the tour outside of this country.
Yes.
And one of your biggest venues that I know you always enjoyed going to was in Japan.
Oh, Japan Cup was a wonderful tournament.
How many of those did you do?
I did 9 of them.
9 of them. What was it like to do lanes over there?
Honestly, it was very relaxing. Flying over there was the boringest part. It was a 12-hour flight, but once you got there, you were treated like a king. I had met some good friends that I still communicate with these days, and they picked us up at the airport. Every time I needed to go in the morning, there would be someone there to bring me in. A gentleman named Toby Itagawa, if you're listening. He was my helper at Tokyo Port Bowl. He would have the lanes all prepped up, line of duster, and he would clean the lanes off with a rotobuff. machine. He'd have it all cleaned, and I'd bring a spray gun, oil, and cleaner, and everything over. And that was quite a challenge getting that on an airplane over to Japan. But I would put this in a big box and check it at the gate and have it there for me in there. And this is what I used for 9 years on each of the Japan Cups that we did at the bowl.
People look at you strange at customs a couple of times, like
actually, yeah, they did. And one time I got stopped and they wasn't going to let me on the airplane. I says, well, or the spray gun on the airplane. I says, if that spray gun does go on the airplane, I don't go on the airplane. Luckily enough, one of the security people was a bowler, and he stepped in and understood what I had, and that's the only reason I got to the next stop on time. Was luckily enough I had a steward there that understood what I was doing.
Well, we've definitely traveled with stuff worse than this.
Yes,
the last 15 years.
Yes.
So I wouldn't mind just carrying this once in a while.
No, it's very easy to.
Steve, I appreciate you coming out. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to probably run this in multiple segments because Steve's got a lot of background. That's why we kind of want to start this off as a back in the day segment. So please look for more episodes concerning lane maintenance, and we're going to cover time frames like we did today from 80s, 90s to current. Steve, I thank you a bunch for coming
Thank you,
out,
Don.
brother,
And we'll do this again a couple more times and
get the whole story out.
absolutely A to Z. And there's a lot of it to entail and to let everybody know.
All right.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, keep those wrenches turning and have a wonderful day.